Thanks, Bill. Thanks, everybody, for coming out this morning. I appreciate it. Luckily, our forefathers made sure that Indiana was also considered a Great Lakes state, not just Michigan. All right, so that we got a little bit of the foot of Lake Michigan, so I consider ourselves a Great Lakes state just because of that. We're not going to talk about all the shipwrecks, so you don't, if you didn't pack your clothes or anything for today. There's quite a few. We'll go over some of there's a lot of interesting ones. We'll go over some of the more interesting ones. There, good, nice. Now, the Great Lakes taken in whole, all 5 of them, hold or contain about 22% of the world's fresh water. That's 65 trillion gallons, which who knows how much that is. It holds 80% of just North America's fresh water. If you were to tilt all of the Great Lakes up and dump them out over the continental United States, down in Central America and South America, you'd be standing in 9.5 inches of water. So we're talking a lot of water. Collectively, all of the surface area of the Great Lakes is 94,000 square miles of water. That is, the 5 Great Lakes would cover a surface area that would be equal to Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Maine, the whole of New England, plus the entire state of New York. And that would give you an idea of how much collective square mile space of water we're talking about. It is not really a lake because they could not figure out a better way to describe what they are. I remember the first time my sister came up to visit me, and she had not seen Lake Michigan before. Took her legs, she thought she could see the other side. I said, no, they're a little larger than that. If you took a knife and cut right down the center of all the Great Lakes, you could see how the elevation works on the Great Lakes. Lake Superior, of course, it's called Superior because it's the deepest. Its deepest point is 1,330 feet. It goes into the St. Mary's River through the Sioux Locks to lock up and lock down into Lake Michigan or Lake Huron. Lake Huron has about 750 feet is its deepest point. Lake Michigan is 923 feet. You have the St. Clair River, you have the Detroit River that leads into Lake Erie. Lake Erie is the shallowest of all the Great Lakes. Its deepest point is only 210 feet. With bad weather, some ships, if the wind is bad enough, coming out of the west and going toward the east, it will actually push the water from Detroit, that area, clear to the Buffalo end of Lake Erie, and ships have to wait in Lake Huron for the water to come back in the bathtub so that they can actually sail, because the water goes down on the western shore area that it's not deep enough. So we're talking a lot of power with that. Of course, Lake Erie goes by Buffalo, and it feeds Lake Ontario via Niagara Falls. Lake Ontario is 802 feet at its deepest point. It eventually walks out into the St. Lawrence Seaway, goes through the Welland Canal for the ships to lock up and down to get from the ocean. So in theory, you can have, and the Great Lakes now do, have a lot of saltwater vessels come into the Great Lakes and out because of the Welland locks and the Sioux locks that can get up and down. Unfortunately, that has caused a major problem for the Great Lakes. Several years ago, a saltwater vessel dumped its ballast tanks into the Great Lakes and let forth the scourge of the Great Lakes, the zebra mussel. A lot of the shipwreck pictures we'll see are covered with this like fur. It's not fur, they're like a parasitic mollusk that covers literally everything. And it'll eventually dissolve. It dissolves wood. It dissolves metal, but not as quickly. But the damage is done now. Unless you have a wreck that is really deep. The shallower wrecks are really hard to discern because they're completely covered with this mossy looking material. Over the past 300 years, there's been more than, they think, 10,000 shipwrecks on the Great Lakes. The first vessel ever put on the Great Lakes, sailing vessel put on the Great Lakes, the Griffin, by French explorer Robert LaSalle, it actually, we believe, sank in the Great Lakes. So from that point on until today, they think there may be 10,000 shipwrecks. They have only identified maybe 10%, maybe. So there's a lot waiting out there for the brave people that can hold their breath pretty well. Since 1679, when LaSalle built his sailing ship and went out onto the Great Lakes, they have an estimated casualty rate of about 30,000. Maybe more, maybe less. Basically, up until about the 1970s, record keeping was poor at best. Lots of ships never even kept a crew record of who was on board working. There was constant problems with the record keeping. In fact, some people, a family heard that a ship went down. They felt like their son was on that ship. They were having a funeral without a body. He had actually jumped ship and gone to another ship, did not tell anybody, did not write home, and he shows up at his own funeral, which is a definite party killer there. So the record keeping could have been much, much better, and that's why we don't know. And plus, it doesn't account for all the little personal craft that went down on the Great Lakes. The Griffin, this is not really a good representation, but they didn't have cameras in 1679, so it was hard to get a picture. This was actually built by Robert LaSalle and his men on the shore of Buffalo, New York, or what would later become Buffalo, New York. They cut down trees. They made a French-designed two-masted schooner, possibly three masts, they don't know. And LaSalle and his men shoved off from the shore onto Lake Erie in 1679. Keep in mind, he had no charts, he had no maps, he had no idea where he was going or where the lakes would take him. They ran into a lot of interesting things. They packed the ship full of fur pelts from animals they found when they would stop at different locations. He, of course, just like every other explorer, was not only trying to see what kind of raw resources were out here in this part of the world, but he was always trying to find that elusive shortcut to India, which we are not. But he did not having maps or Google GPS or anything like that, you're at the mercy of trying to figure out where you're at. Eventually they sail up past Detroit, which was nothing but a swampy little fort area. They make it up into Lake Huron. They make it to around the Straits of Mackinac, where the Mackinac Bridge is, and finally they sail down into Green Bay, what would later be Green Bay, just in time for a Packers football game. And there was no Packers, man. And so LaSalle and his men decided that they had gone far enough, plus it was getting really crowded on the ship because they had it packed to the rafters with things they found, pelts especially. LaSalle was not a sailor, so he had hired a sailor, a pilot to pilot the ship, who knew what he was doing, and evidently from diaries LaSalle kept, him and the ship captain did not get along very much, so it must have been a much longer trip than it seemed. And so LaSalle and his men decided to get off take their canoes and further go down the western shore of Lake Michigan around. And that's when they found the St. Joe River and came up the St. Joe River and on to the Mississippi and everything else. But he told the ship captain and his crew to sail back to Mackinac Island because it had a fort. The fort had a trading post within it. He said, wait there, I'll be there in about three to 5 months. We'll cash out all the furs. We'll divide the money up amongst all of us. Ship captain, they watch the Griffin sail out in upper Lake Michigan, go below the horizon line. LaSalle and his men continue on. Nobody ever sees the Griffin again. Native American, when he came back later to try to search for what happened to this ship, some Native Americans in the St. Ignace area of the UP told him they saw a giant canoe and it was fighting with snow and weather and everything else, and they never saw it again. Some have said that, it sank upper Lake Huron possibly. Some have said that the ship captain and the crew made it to Mackinac Island, cashed out the furs for themselves, pocketed the money, and set the Griffin on fire and pushed it out in upper Lake Huron and burned to the water line. That's possible too. But nobody really knows. But basically, from when underwater archaeology started, they have searched for this ship or its remains since then. Every summer, some underwater archaeological dig says they found remnants of the Griffin, and it never turns out. 10,000 shipwrecks to get this one, the odds are not good. But that was Robert LaSalle. The first sailing vessel on the Great Lakes is also the first shipwreck. Yeah. Once, like I said, not great odds. This is the Cypress. The steamer Cypress was launched in Lorain, Ohio, August 17, 1907. On her second trip across the Great Lakes, the Cypress was loaded with 7,000 tons of iron ore. It had loaded at Superior, Wisconsin, and left the docks October 10, 1907, on her way across Lake Superior to Fairport, Ohio. On October 11th, now we all know from September to December, you are rolling dice, all right? It is a dangerous place. All the lakes are a dangerous place in the good weather. From September on, you are fighting for your life a lot of times. The lakes are placed in the worst possible place. You get around September to December of every year, you get dry, cold air coming down from the Arctic Circle that's now turning cold, and you're starting to get that Gulf moisture coming up from the Gulf of Mexico. And where does it collide? Doom, right over the Great Lakes. And that's why there's so many blasted storms in those months, because of that meteorological issue that they have at their placement. So, the Cypress, they think, was caught out in a storm somewhere around Whitefish Point, Whitefish Bay. It was a moderate storm, but the Cypress was equipped with hatch covers that cover all of this area. The Cypress in this picture is not loaded. It's riding really high in the water. When it's loaded with 7,000 tons of iron, there's about 2 feet of sideboard that you see, and then it's water. That also makes it dangerous because the waves can be 20, 30, upwards of 60, 70 feet high. They have hatch covers, but the hatch covers aren't watertight yet. If you expect bad weather, you have to put the hatch covers on. Then you have to take this tarpaulin and put this tarp over each of the lid covers to keep them watertight. Crews hated it. Captain didn't want to hear a bunch of belly aching, and so a lot of times he just said, close it, leave. Unfortunately, Cypress went out and found itself in the middle of a moderate storm. At 7 p.m. on October 11th, water was coming across the deck and flooding the unsealed hatch covers, of course, and the ship began to list to one side, which is dangerous for a ship that only has 2 feet of freeboard space on the side. The Cypress, evidently what they call turned turtle. It actually listed so far it couldn't go it could not recover, and it turned turtle upside down and slipped into the darkness of Lake Superior. Only one sailor made it to shore, wheelman Charlie Pitts. Lake Superior took the other 22 with her. Nothing was ever seen or heard from again. The $250,000 Cypress in 1907 was a lot of money. Had only lasted 55 days on the Great Lakes. It was only its second trip. Some ships that were built back in the 50s are still sailing. They've had, of course, improvements and repairs and updates and that sort of stuff, but they still function. Cypress, not so lucky. Oh, sorry, they did find it. I think they found that thing in the 90s, late 90s, and they found it sitting on its side in water. It's about 1,000 feet down, so you have to have special mix air to get down there, but they always take a picture of the stern and found the Cypress. They still find them today. They found 2 this year that had been missing, assumed they were they call ghost ships, but they found them. The Henry B. Smith, Captain Ira Owen steered the Henry B. Smith into the docks at Marquette, Michigan, November 7, 1913. Storm warnings had been issued for the Upper Peninsula at the time. The Smith was being loaded with iron ore. However, on Saturday, the weather was so bad that the iron pellets had frozen into the chutes. So you had to have some guy with a bar up there poking, waiting for them, to come down. So it delayed their loading procedure. It finally opened up, and it was at the instance of Captain Owen that the ship was finally loaded at 5 p.m. on Sunday, November 9th. The captain was such a hurry, he left the docks while the deckhands were still putting the lids on the individual deck holes, the loading holes, which is bad news, all right? You want those things fastened tight before you need them fastened. But he was in such a hurry to get out. Plus, at this time, there's basically a love-hate relationship between ship captains and the early version of the weather service. Captains had been sailing in bad weather for years and years and years. They knew better. Some ships had left. It was calm, blue sky, no wind, 60 degrees. You got Mill Lake, whammo, 20 below zero, wind blowing, So you never know. But they always thought, they knew better and they could survive any storm that came along. But nonetheless, Captain Owen left the dock. He got out into Lake Superior and ran into a frenzied storm. Another ship captain saw the Smith make a hard left turn, and possibly Captain Owen realized he had made a boo-boo and was deciding to go back to hide behind the Keweenaw Peninsula, which is like a finger on the south shore of Lake Superior that pokes up in the middle of the lake. If you can get back there, you can get shielded usually from the wind that's coming out of the west or the northwest. He was trying to get back there. That's what the other ship captain thought. But after he lost sight of the Smith, nobody ever saw the Smith again. The Smith went down in what would later become called the Armistice Day Storm of November 11th, 1913, and took all 24 crew members to the bottom. They found it many years later. It is way down there. You can see how black it is. This is kind of the patio area above the pylons. When it's hot out in the summer, you can come up here and control the ship from up top in the fresh air. I assume he was not up there in November, all right? The Pubic, it was mainly tourists who boarded the Pubic, and as the ship left Houghton, Michigan on August 7th, 1865, for a trip to Detroit. About 200 passengers were on board along with freight, including 265 tons of copper and 175 tons of high-quality ore. When the Pubic made it into Upper Lake Huron, the captain saw her sister ship, which was named the Meteor, sailing upbound, so they were coming towards each other. A common practice was that two related ships owned by the same company would sometimes come alongside of each other and trade mail and papers, newspapers. Because they've been out for days, they don't know what's going on. Plus, it's the end of the Civil War, there's a lot of news going on. However, somehow, just when they got close, the colored lights that are supposed to mark the starboard and port side and the stern were mixed up on the Meteor. Don't know if it was an inexperienced deckhand that switched the colors around or something, but something happened, and the Pubic made a hard right turn like it was supposed to, and the Meteor slammed right in the side of it, poked a hole in it. A lot of the passengers were able to jump from the Pubic onto the Meteor before the Meteor pulled out. The Pubic sank in 5 minutes. Took 125 people down with her at the bottom of Lake Huron. Steam. Ran on coal, had a really early version of they call it triple expansion steam engine, really early. Years later, after the sinking, 5 salvage divers have died trying to get the copper out of the holds of the Pubic. This is a young lady wreck diver. She is in the rear of the Pubic, looking out. And you can see the carpet of zebra mussels that are on everything. They finally had a salvage company come in, and the salvage company used this diving bell. Guy got in it. He has 2 little tools he can use. They lowered him down, and they were able to bring up all the copper in these barrels, high-quality iron ore. They're washing it off, and it was finders keepers. All right, so he had a good day that day. It took them a couple days to get it all up, but they did get it all up. If you're claustrophobic, this is your nightmare right here. The Regina. The Regina was built in Dumbarton, Scotland, and arrived in the Great Lakes in October of 1907. The 256-foot freighter was lost in the Great Storm of November 7th to November 10th, 1913, the Armistice Day storm, as they call it. On July 1st, 1986, its wreckage was discovered at the bottom of Lake Huron, lying on its starboard side with 1 anchor lying out, and the pilot house clock had stopped at 4:20 a.m. on November 10th, 1913. Historians believe that an effort was being made to abandon ship when it dove below the surface for some apparent reason. 15 sailors died. When they discovered it, they still discovered crates of champagne and wine that had not broken during the sinking. They brought up the bell. The bell is in a museum, but I can't remember which one. And people would kill me if I did not at least mention possibly the most famous shipwreck. This usually gets people in to learning a little bit more about the Great Lakes and how dangerous it is for sailors even today to try to sail on the Great Lakes. The Edmund Fitzgerald was built in Michigan. She was 729 feet long, 75 feet wide, and when she was empty, she weighed 13,632 tons. When she was launched in 1958, July 7th, she was the largest lake freighter at the time, and she set all kinds of haul records. She would beat her own record year after year for several years. It cost $84 million to build. It cost Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company $84 million. They were the ones that wanted the ship built and put into service so that they could gather more profit for their shareholders. And they thought that was a pretty good idea, and it wasn't bad. It was a decent idea. On the launch, day, July 7, 1958, they had 15,000 people at River Rouge in Detroit watching the launch. It didn't really go as planned. Edmund Fitzgerald was a real person. He was the CEO of Northwestern Mutual Life. His son would become mayor of Milwaukee and eventually brought the Milwaukee Brewers baseball team to town. Edmund did not want the ship named after him, and he profusely relented and did not want his name used for the ship, even though his board of directors did. So at one meeting, they had him step out and get something to drink, and when he came back, they had voted that the next ship was going to be named that, and what could he do at that point? When she was lost in 1975, she was worth $24 million, which is a lot of money today, still a lot of money. When she was launched, Edmund Fitzgerald had his wife, Mrs. Fitzgerald, break the ever-loving bottle of champagne against the bow of the ship. It took her 3 times to break it. Sailors are very superstitious. Everything. They are supposed to not leave port on a Friday because that's when Jesus was crucified. There's all kinds of weird things they have. Cats are good luck on a boat, because it gets rid of the rats and mice that are on the ship. Women are not good luck on a ship, evidently. They distract sailors from their job. It took her 3 times to break that champagne on the bow, and when she finally broke it, it took the crew on land almost 20 minutes to get it to roll down. They were knocking blocks out, and it wasn't moving. And so they're underneath the ship on its cribbage, taking hammers and busting out, and finally the thing slid down into the slip there. But then the guys that were supposed to hold the ropes weren't paying attention, or they got bored or something, and the hull banged up against the upside of the slip and threw up this big torrent of water that drowned everybody on the other side watching the thing. It was so traumatic that there was a guy standing on the thing. He had a fatal heart attack and died right there. 2 strikes. Couldn't break and couldn't launch it properly, and you have somebody dead at the launching. That is bad news. Bad news. But she sailed many years, no problems. She had 748 round trips in her 17-year career. Usually took about 5 days for a round trip there and back. Typically, she would get iron ore from Superior, Wisconsin, and take it down to Zug Island or River Rouge down at Detroit to feed the furnaces at Ford and Chevrolet. Her top speed was about 16 miles an hour. She set 6 seasonal cargo record hauls during a sailing season. She even broke her own records. She kept records up until, I believe, the Carl Bradley was launched, and it took over. It also sank. On the day of November 9th and 10th, basically, the Fitzgerald was facing a terrible storm of the century. Maximum wind 70 miles an hour. You had 23 feet waves hitting front and back from side to side. The problem with the lakes is you never know where the waves are coming from. It's like a bathtub. If you take a ball and splash it, you can watch the waves go out. They hit the edge and come right back. And sometimes they come back worse than they were when they went out. So it's a multiplication factor, and it is tough. When it sank, it had 26,116 tons of iron ore pellets, and that was enough to build 75 automobiles in 1975, not now, since they're all made of plastic. They were only 17 miles from Whitefish Bay. If they had made Whitefish Bay, they'd been okay. The storm wasn't bad there. In fact, there was hundreds of ships already tied up in Whitefish Bay waiting the storm out. The Arthur Anderson, another freighter, was following it about 10 miles behind, mainly because about halfway through the storm, the waves had got so high, it broke off the radar and sonar system antennas on the top of the pilot house of the Fitzgerald. And so the poor captain, McSorley of the Fitzgerald, was sailing blind. And he was asking the Anderson for updates as to where he was in comparison to try to get to around an island system called Caribou Island, which he shouldn't have been sailing around anyway. But nonetheless, the Arthur Anderson, the captain of the Anderson, kept a pretty close eye on him, talked to him through the radio phone. He told him he had a list, that he had deck rail that was down, which is a feat beyond itself. The cables that run down the deck on deck are inch thick, and they're braided cable. And they're stuck in a pipe that is connected all the way down to the bottom of the ship. He said he had about half down. So we're talking serious waves to pull that out. You could still get from the stern to the bow by going underneath the deck. There was these passages. Most ships have those now, where the crew does not have to get out on the deck and try to, wiggle their way across the deck on 23-foot waves. So they could walk underneath. However, whatever happened to Fitzgerald, it happened suddenly. The captain of the Anderson had made a last call about 10 o'clock at night on the 10th, and he got a response that, the Fitzgerald, the captain of the Fitzgerald said he was holding his own, and that was the last time anybody heard anything. The Anderson continued on. They went through what they thought could have been. They were looking for a debris field for oil. Couldn't find anything. They made it to Whitefish Bay. It took 45 minutes for the captain of the Anderson to finally convince the Coast Guard that something had happened to the Fitzgerald. They couldn't believe it. It took them at least almost an hour for Captain Cooper on the Anderson to finally, look, I'm telling you people, get your planes, get your boats, get out there. Something bad has happened. And they finally did. They sent an airplane, but it was 12 hours away. If the men did not have dry suits, which they didn't have dry suits back then anyway, they'd have lasted 10 minutes. The Coast Guard station contacted Mr. Cooper, Captain Cooper of the Anderson, asked him if he would turn around and go back out and look and see if he could find any survivors. He was very reluctant, but he turned around and went out anyway. There was also two other ships that they called Whitefish Bay to all the ships stationed there, asking them to leave and go out and try to help find the Fitzgerald. Only two did it. William Clay Ford was one. They made it out. There was another smaller ship that couldn't even make it out of Whitefish Bay. The seas were so bad. So it turned around and went back. But they searched most of the night in weather we can only comprehend in our dreams. But pretty soon, it didn't take until the next morning. They started finding life preservers and pieces of wood and different things that they found. Not a whole lot from a 729-foot ship. They finally eventually, they sent over a P-3 Orion spy plane over the area that detects metal beneath it, and at 530 feet, it detected some kind of steel anomaly. That's the Fitzgerald. And so when they sent diving crew back, they sent a little unmanned submersible down and found that the ship had broken into two pieces, either on top or going down, or when it hit the bottom. They just don't know. They're several hundred feet apart. The stern is upside down. And they made positive identification when they did this, and this is the first image back that they confirmed she had sunk. Like I said, the only thing they really found of any substance were the two aluminum lifeboats. it looks like Godzilla has got a hold of them. They only found half of one. It was completely sheared in half. And this one was torn at the bow where the rivets come together, and it was ripped open. So they know something catastrophic happened. Nobody really knows. There's a lot of guesses, even up to the point that UFOs were involved somehow, like they've got nothing better else to do. So, like I said, there's so many wrecks. The Fitzgerald's a sad moment in shipping history just because, A, it happened in most of our lifetime. I remember my parents talking about it. I was about 6 years old, but I remember my parents talking about it. But nobody had really given it a thought how difficult it was to be a Great Lakes sailor. We had always assumed guys on the Bering Strait fishing, and that's right. It's dangerous, but there's been a lot of saltwater captains who said, look, I want to retire. I'm going to go to the Great Lakes and drive a yacht around, you know, kind of thing. And they don't last a whole season. They go through one storm and they've had enough. And they go back to the ocean. But after the Fitzgerald went down, luckily, government started paying attention to new technology coming out, and a lot of safety changes happened. And basically, that's probably why we haven't had a major wreck since then. There's, of course, not as much traffic that there used to be. Basically, bulk items being sent now by ship are still iron off and on. A lot of times, most of the times, it's limestone for steel, Gary, U.S. Steel and Gary, concrete, wheat, but usually those are taken by foreign countries, saltwater ships that come in, get a load of wheat, grain, corn, whatever, and then they leave. But you couldn't have had Detroit, Chicago, Gary, Cleveland, Buffalo, any of those without the shipping on the Great Lakes. They took the place of millions of train box cars full of stuff, and it was much cheaper to sail that way. But like I said, one big thing that after the U.S. Coast Guard's theory about what happened to the Fitzgerald, that they had loose hatch covers because the crew didn't tighten them down, which is kind of being disproven, let too much water in and it sunk it. But now, after the Fitzgerald sinking, all ships have to have a depth sonar to know exactly how deep they are wherever they're at on the Great Lakes. Fitzgerald had very outdated depth chart maps, and it could possibly have been that they hit something around Caribou Island that cracked the hull. They have a bad thing called sagging and hogging. Sagging is where a wave comes up and picks up the whole ship in the middle, but lets the bow and stern droop. That's bad, especially a loaded ship. The ships like that are made to flex, but they're like a spoon. If you wiggle a spoon back and forth, eventually it breaks. Same idea. Sagging is like that, hogging is the other end, where it picks up the bow and the stern, and then you've got 58,000 tons of material in midair hanging, and it wants to droop down. The constant lifetime of going back and forth weakens structure, no matter how they could have put 20-inch thick steel in there. Wouldn't make any difference. The flexing is what they needed. But it's still a dangerous job. It doesn't take near amount of crew that it did back when they were back in the Fitzgerald days and before. A lot of stuff is automated now. The ships are able to offload themselves. They have self-offloaders. It's just a big conveyor belt that swings out and they can dump anywhere. And Arthur Anderson is still sailing. I saw it this summer. Still going around. It gets a big head of applause every time it comes into port. People come from everywhere to come look. The anniversary's got a lot of stuff coming up. If you can make it out to Whitefish Point. The Detroit Mariners Church in Detroit is having a huge thing. They always ring the bell 29 times and then ring it once for all the other sailors that have perished on the Great Lakes. Yes.
Did they ever find the Christmas tree boat that goes in?
Yeah, they finally found it. Rouse Simmons is what they called it. It was a Christmas tree ship. He would sail out of Chicago, go up into the UP. They would cut Christmas trees down, load that thing with tons of Christmas trees, bring them back to Chicago and sell them. And people waited every year for the Christmas tree ship to come in. Well, it got caught in a storm, probably overloaded, and it sank off the coast of Wisconsin, Illinois, just in that area. Fishermen who dragged nets that way complained for years they kept bringing up Christmas trees in the net, and they could never figure out why they were bringing up Christmas trees off the bottom of Lake Michigan. So finally somebody did some research and went out there and found it, and it was upright. And so every year I think it's right around before Thanksgiving, a diver takes a Christmas tree down and puts it on the bow of the ship and then takes it off and when the lake unfreezes. Yes, the Coast Guard does on their, Mackinac, I think, their Mackinac Ice Buster, they still bring Christmas trees in. He made a fortune just by doing that every year. They hauled lumber normally, and then some coal sometimes, but his big business was cutting those Christmas trees down, getting them in. Yeah, the Christmas tree ship. They made a play out of it. Children's books, they made a lot of children's books out of it. Yes, he was retired at the time. And
I told you
I knew I shouldn't have had my wife. You know. His family said, his son said it was kind of like a gut punch for him, and he took it. He said the happiest day of his life was when it was launched. He said he was walking this far off the ground. And he said when it sank, he said it devastated him for the rest of his life. And he wasn't so concerned about the ship, but he was very distraught about the men that went down with it. Because he kind of took it personally that he built that ship personally and, you know, all this. But yeah, it devastated him for the rest of his life. Yes?
I read an interview by Gordon Lightfoot who said that he changed the lyrics when they discovered that the hatches were tight. That now after that point when he sang the song, he didn't mention it.
Yeah, one of the first things they did, the U.S. Coast Guard did when they went down to the Fitzgerald is they went to the parts of the deck that were upright to see if any hatches, because some of the deckhands said that on calm summer days they would only latch every other one because there's hundreds to do. And they're a pain, evidently, to put on. But they went down and they said every one of those hatch cover were fastened down. Every one of them. Yes?
Did they find the bell to the Fitzgerald?
Yeah, they took that up.
It's at the Great Lakes Shipwreck
Museum. It's still there. Yeah, it's still there. Yeah, they take it out. They'll take it out on the 10th, and they'll take it and ring it 29 times, 30. They took a replica bell and had it made, and they engraved all the sailors' names on it. And then the diver that used the cutting torch to take it off welded it back in its place. So, and finally, just within the last decade, finally the family it's in Canadian waters. The family finally got Canada to block it off as a national burial place, and nobody can dive to it anymore. They were having people go down and take videos, and it was, Gordon Lightfoot was very sensitive about the family and kept in touch with all the family members while he was alive. He wrote the song because he read an article in U.S. News and World Report, and they misnamed the ship, and he thought that was horrific for a magazine, a national world magazine, to make that kind of mistake. So he sat down and started writing out this song about it. He wrote it for a long time, put it to music of an old Irish seagoing shanty, and then record it. They record it in Toronto. They played it 30 times and recorded it 30 times, but the first time they did it was the one that made it on the record. And that never happens, Gordon said. Never happens.
If you've ever listened to that song and you mentally try to speed it up, it's like an Irish jig. It is.
He freely admitted he heard it as a
I
kid.
heard that.
Yeah, he heard it as a kid, evidently, but he didn't know what it was titled. Way down.
Yeah.
Way down. But he
Suppose they went fairly quickly if it was really cold.
they believe most of the Fitzgerald sailors were entrapped. They think maybe the captain and the crew in the pilot house may have been blown out because all the windows were blown in. So they went suddenly. But like the engineering crew, all the crew quarters are in the port or the stern. Thank you, stern of the ship. Guys down in the engine room. There were still guys in the engine room. They were probably entrapped. The reason that Superior doesn't give up her dead is because the water's so cold all year. Gases in the body do not have chance to decompose, therefore it doesn't make gas to make your body float like you would in the Caribbean. So when you drown, down you go and you stay. And that's why they hardly ever find any bodies usually, ever. Sorry.
My grandmother was a survivor of the Eastland.
Oh boy.
And actually, after the ship was brought up and purchased by the Navy, and my grandfather on the other side of my family ended up assigned to that ship during World War I. So I remember seeing
Yeah,
there's
they-
a picture of it became the Wilmette. USS
Right.
Wilmette. So,
The Eastland was a passenger ship that usually ran between St. Joseph, Michigan, and Chicago, but you could hire it. And so Western Electric had a huge plant in Chicago on the outskirts. They made all the telephones. Everybody that had a telephone in the early 1900s, it came from Western Telegraph there. And so they had a company outing, thousands and thousands of people. And the Eastland was docked in the Chicago River at its dock to pick up the passengers. It was a less than seaworthy boat. It had a lot of weird engineering problems. It had a bad tendency to tip, which is very bad. Which is very bad for a ship. All right, very, very bad. Especially a passenger ship. And so while it was docked and people were coming on the ship, it first leaned toward the dock, then it righted itself, and they're using the ballast tanks trying to flood and eat, get rid of the. But eventually it rolled over on its side into the Chicago River. Actually, there were 844 passenger deaths, which is more than the Titanic.
Yeah, and no one's ever heard of it.
Nobody's ever heard of it. Yeah, nobody's ever heard of it. And they hired a company, and they righted the ship, pumped all the water out of it, righted it, and then cut some of the decks off, and then they restyled it as a Navy ship. And then after World War II, they used the Great Lakes Naval Training Center, used it for gun practice and stuff for World War II Navy guys. And eventually, after World War II was over, they sold it for scrap and cut it up. But after it was righted and given to the government, it never had a problem again. It never acted like it wanted to, but it seemed like every couple years they would have some kind of passenger problem where it would start to lean.
I mean, one of the things I learned from reading a couple books about it was that you've got this unstable ship, and then the Titanic went down, added regulations, which probably, added lifeboats, which just then made it even more
Unstable. They put more weight on top that it did not need. Plus, just before the sinking and just before a St. Joseph, Michigan company bought it, they took out the wooden dance floor and poured concrete for the floor. So it was a disaster waiting to happen, and like I said, nobody's heard of it. When you figure in the passengers of the Titanic and all of the crew, that's what shoots the number up, because they had over like 1,200 crew die. The Eastland didn't have that many crew, but it actually had more actual passenger deaths than the Titanic did. But
And it was right in Chicago.
it was right down, it was right there. And a lot of the problem was people were watching the ship being loaded, and it rolled over. People were done. Keep in mind at that time, the Chicago River was Chicago's sewer. So people were throwing wood and all kinds of stuff trying to save these people. There were a lot of people that couldn't swim. And I think the average age of a Eastland passenger was something like 21. Hundreds of people went home, widowers, lots of children drowned. They set up a morgue in the Salvation Army building, or not Salvation Army, but the National Guard Armory building in downtown Chicago. And that's where they had laid all the bodies, and you had to go by and you had to look to see if it was your loved one. That building stayed a National Guard building for some time, and then was turned into Harpo Studios for Oprah. She said that she would not go in there at night because odd things happened. Even the crew talked about things falling down for no apparent reason and stuff. But yeah, they have an Eastland Disaster Society, and they have a nice marker and a little museum there now where the ship had docked for the day. But yeah, it's a fantastically tragic story that nobody's ever heard of, and nobody was held responsible. That's what ticks me off. Nobody. The lawyer for the defense, the shipping company, was the famous lawyer that did the Scopes monkey trial. Darrow. Thank you, Clarence Darrow. He was the attorney for the defense, and basically nobody, not even the company, nothing. Basically, Western Electric paid benefits to all of the affected families that day. They got nothing out of the company, nothing.
10,000 of these, you say?
Yeah, so that was number 4. That was 4.
Yeah,
Let's go to
we talked
5.
about 4 plus a bonus rate.
Right.
Can there be a part 2?
We've had several parts, several parts. Still 10,000.
Yeah.
Real quick, anybody who hasn't been to the Maritime Museum in
Yeah.
South Haven,
Oh yeah, it's great.
that's really wonderful. If you want to see what travel was like for
Yeah.
like tourism and stuff.
It's very close by.
Yeah, they had a great exhibit about 10 years ago. I went up there. There was a Eastern Airlines flight that went down in Lake Michigan that they have yet to find, but things washed up on shore, and they had all that stuff laying. It was pocketbooks, luggage, clothing, toys, all kinds of things that they found up and down from South Haven all the way down.
Travis, first of all,
Thanks, everybody.